Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for the second panel in our series on Beyond Law Firms. Today's panel will focus on JD Advantage roles, and we'll talk a bit more about that in detail. First off, my name is Andre Bacchus. I am the Director of Career Development and Professional Placement at Ryerson University's Lincoln Alexander School of Law. I'm joined today by a number of distinguished guests who are using their JDs in different types of opportunities to be able to make their way forward in their careers. Before we touch on all of that, though, I'd like to begin today's session with our land acknowledgement that we recite at the beginning of each of our events at Ryerson Law. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. As part of Ryerson's commitment and the commitment of all other universities on this joint session, through reciting this acknowledgement, we commit ourselves to truth and reconciliation and ensuring that we remember that we're part of a shared partnership. Now, today's panel has a number of different features part of it. The first feature will be a series of questions that I have for our panelists, but also we want to hear from each of you. So we're hoping that you'll be able to send your questions to me directly through the chat function in Zoom located on your toolbar. So just select my name, Andre Bacchus, and you'll be able to send your question through to me. I will then pose it to the panelists as we move forward. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and give them an opportunity to share with you their experiences. Today, we're very fortunate to be able to be joined by Jessica Petrusiak from the Toronto Transit Commission, Conrad Poehler from Diligent, Akua Kwanzaa from CFAR, and Jonathan Davey from Scotiabank. Each of these individuals have amazing careers, and when you look at the chat function here, you'll see a link being posted to each of their bios that you can then download and learn a bit more about them. But without further ado, I will turn it over to Akua first to give her an introduction about her career path and herself, and then we'll move forward through the rest of the panelists. So Akua, over to you.
Hi, I was going to say good morning, but I guess good afternoon, everybody. As Andre mentioned, I am currently the head of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at CFAR, which is the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And CFAR is a global research institute that convenes academics from around the world to research complex questions that have significant impacts for science and for humanity more broadly. I got into this work. Actually, I started at CFAR probably about a month ago, but prior to that, my work has always been in equity, diversity, and inclusion. I went to University of Ottawa, particularly because I wanted to focus on social justice law. And from there, I always knew that I didn't want to pursue a traditional legal path. So I sought out opportunities that were outside of traditional legal practice, starting off at Seneca College as a conflict resolution advisor, moving on to the Law Society of Ontario as a policy council and equity initiatives, and then moving to Hudson's Bay in a corporate retail environment as their first diversity and inclusion lead, creating their first diversity and inclusion strategy. And now I've landed at CFAR. So that's just a bit of a snapshot as to how I've where I've gone on my career path, and I can get into that a little bit more as we move on in the session.
Thank you so much, Akua. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Petrusiak, and I am currently the Manager of Human Rights at the Toronto Transit Commission. So the Toronto Transit Commission, as many people in Toronto will know, or the TTC, is a service that runs across all of Toronto. It runs all the buses, all the subways, all the streetcars, and also we have our Wheel-Trans model as well for customers who, sorry, my screen's just having a little bit of trouble. There we go. For customers who have different service needs. So my role at the TTC, it's very unique. I work with both customers, so our public facing, but also employees. Sorry, that's my dog. And I essentially handle all human rights complaints at the TTC, whether that be an investigation internally, harassment, discrimination, or externally at the Human Rights Tribunal. It's a really dynamic role, really interesting. I started out as a labor and employment associate at a big law firm in downtown Toronto, and then I ended here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Andre. Skinol, John Davy, Haudenosaunee, Lower Cayuga, Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. I'm currently the Vice President of Indigenous Financial Services at Scotiabank. Really what my role entails is I work with all of the bank's Indigenous clients and prospects, and utilizing my law degree to understand the constraints under the Indian Act, First Nation Land Management Act, First Nation Fiscal Management Act, just to state a few, and so that we can help better structure credit for our Indigenous clients and work around those constraints. Prior to joining the bank about 3 years ago, I spent 10 years as a federal attorney, as a Crown, working exclusively in Aboriginal law. So I had experience both as a barrister and as a solicitor, and that's really what drives my practice with the bank right now. And beyond that, for the last 12 years, I've been a reservist with the Canadian Armed Forces, serving as a captain with the Queen's York Rangers. So that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And Conrad, over to you.
Thanks, Andre. Hi, everyone. I'm Conrad Pola. So I'm the CEO at Diligent, and Diligent is a legal tech company. So what we do is provide software for law firms, for in-house legal organizations, and government. And what we specifically focus on is document analytics, so helping lawyers gain insights into their contracts, helping organizations get insights into court forms, and working with in-house counsel on specific projects, whether it's M&A or LIBOR, things that tend to occupy the time of groups of lawyers at organizations where technology can help lawyers with performing their tasks. And before that, I was a corporate lawyer for a few years, including working with Andre at Heenan Blakey a number of years ago, and then at another firm in downtown Toronto.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Conrad. So you've all described a varied career path. In fact, a path where you started out in maybe a traditional type law role and have moved into now the different types of roles that you have at this moment. I'm wondering, for those on this session and for our students who aren't familiar with the term JD Advantage, I'm hoping that we can spend a few moments defining that, helping them to appreciate what it means to be in a non-traditional, if you will, and as we call it now, JD Advantage, what it means to be the type of role that you're in and how you're using your legal skills to provide support or also expand opportunities within your area. So this time I'd like to begin with Jonathan. If you can tell us a bit more about what this means for you and how you're leveraging those skills that you gained at Osgood, and then later on in practice and now into what you're doing.
Absolutely, Andre. So this is a great question, because I think the best way to describe what I do is I provide legal analysis, but not legal opinions in my current role. So as I mentioned previously, I spent 10 years as a federal Crown working in Aboriginal law. There I was exposed to a lot of different concepts about the legislation and regulation and even case law that impacts Indigenous communities' ability to actually access capital. So taking that experience and taking even the education I received in law school and applying it to essentially what a financial institution does when it comes to lending and cash management and wealth management for an Indigenous client base involves me to draw upon, okay, what are the legislative constraints or what are the constraints under the case law that are going to impact an Indigenous client's ability to actually be able to get these credit facilities or work with these financial products. So really, this is a JD Advantage role because I do legal analysis as a big part of my day, but unlike being a practicing lawyer with the Department of Justice, I'm not providing those legal opinions. And advocacy looks much different between the two roles. So when I was advocating at the Department of Justice, it was within a legal forum. There was a formal adjudicator there. We were deciding points of fact and law. At the bank, I'm advocating when I talk to our risk people, when I talk to our due diligence people to help get a deal done, because they're going to look at it differently than I do. So I still need to wear my barrister hat from time to time while utilizing my solicitor skills. But really the JD Advantage role that I see in the financial industry is understanding the law, specifically the legislation, and adapting the bank practices through policy so that we can better serve a client base.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was great. And Akua, over to you about how you're leveraging those skills and how they've provided you the ability and the opportunity to do what you're doing.
Sure. So in my role as equity, diversity, and inclusion lead, I work on developing strategies to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in workplaces. I do training for employees, for the communities in which I work. I advise on various initiatives to give an equity lens to the work that other departments are doing. So whether it's HR, IT, finance, it's a range of different departments. And so in doing that, I am using, similar to what I think Jonathan said, I'm using my advocacy skills, first of all, because I'm working to, advocate on behalf of equity deserving communities, making sure that everyone's voices are included when decisions are being made and that inclusive decisions are being made, flagging the impact that, that initiatives will have on equity deserving communities. And so all of that involves advocacy, because I think often, people, some of the work is, changing people's minds. That's not the lens through which decisions are often made in institutions. And so making sure that viewpoint is at the table. So advocacy skills are absolutely key there, as well as, understanding that human rights law, understanding employment equity and how those play into, some of the decisions that we're making. Again, I'm not giving legal advice, but, as Jonathan said, I'm giving, using a legal analysis, giving opinions, but not legal opinions, right? So it's absolutely an asset to have a law degree in doing this role.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kua. Conrad, you started your own company. You're not practicing now. How did this unfold, and why is this now a viable JD Advantage role in tech for someone like yourself and for others down the road? What does that mean to be in this type of space, if you will?
Yeah, exactly, Andre. So I founded the company, co-founder at the company about 6 years ago. And prior to that, I was practicing. And the company basically operates in the legal technology space. And that's an ecosystem that there are probably thousands of companies around the world that operate to provide software and adjacent services to law firms, to in-house legal counsel. And those types of roles often require greatly benefit from having a JD, because if you're client facing, you're going to be speaking to lawyers lawyers practicing all the time. You're going to be working on solving problems that law firms have in when it comes to them managing their practice, or what problems that in-house legal counsel have. So having a JD for those types of for those types of roles is extremely beneficial, because you have the background that you can understand what your clients are saying to you in terms of what they're looking to do. So there's a variety of roles actually in the legal tech space, whether it's on the product side. So those are sort of developing products that lawyers would be using, to the client-facing side, whether that's sort of early on in the relationship where it's sales, or later on in the relationship where it's what tech companies call customer success, or it's actually a lot of enterprise sales. A lot of enterprise software companies actually have a large portion of their revenue coming from services, not just software subscriptions. So it's working with the client to come up with customized solutions for their specific needs. So there's in this space, there's actually a very big opportunity for people with JDs, but who aren't actually practicing and giving legal advice. So we aren't giving legal advice. We don't practice law in Ontario or anywhere, but we have clients around the world, and we work with them to understand their problems, and the JD is extremely helpful for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Conrad. Jessica, I want to put a bit of a twist on the question for you, because I know in your role, you're focusing on some legal issues and you're dealing with issues that come up as part of the HR group. First off, are you part of the in-house legal team, and are you dispensing advice, or are you providing additional support that's outside of that in-house team?
So great question. The TTC has a very large legal team. We do have, I think, about 15,000 employees, and we move about, last time I checked, pre-pandemic, about 2.8 million people a day during any workday. So we have a very large, it's a very large organization. So we have a very large legal team. I'm not part of that in-house team. The Human Rights Department is a separate department within the TTC. And it just created, it was just part of a new department. And I think it's called Diversity and Culture, I believe, is the new name of the department that we're housed within. So we have our in-house legal team, and we also have a very large external legal team. So we, have contracts with many law firms across the city. And I would say a lot of my job is translating the legal department and the reality of what it means. So for example, we may get an opinion back from our legal department or from our external legal team. And my role is to translate, okay, so they're saying this is the law, this is what we need to do, but how do we make that into a reality and make it happen? So for example, when we started to transition all of our buses and streetcars and subways to have external audible announcements to serve a certain portion of our community, that was the direction given under AODA. But how does that translate, and what does that mean in terms of day-to-day actions? What has to happen to get there? And you may have our maintenance team come back and say, well, we can do this. And it's like, well, that doesn't meet the legislation that we need to satisfy. That doesn't meet our obligations. And so having a JD is just extremely beneficial, because I can take the law, I can take the opinions and try to put them into more day-to-day terms, because we all know lawyers, we all like to speak, in abstract and in maybes and in gray areas. And so it's helpful to have our team on the ground to try to figure out how to make that into a reality.
Fair enough. And Jessica, on that point, as being that bridge and that translator, if you will, and that implementer, do you find it in any way difficult that you're not part of the legal team, but you're now tasked with understanding and implementing and rolling out the advice that they are providing or the instructions that they are giving?
It's definitely challenging. We have to go back and forth many times to make sure that we're within the law. And it's also a lot about assessing risk, which I think is something you learn a lot in law school, is what, not everything in the world can be done exactly as, legislators intended. And looking at the risk and seeing, okay, well, what do we want to take to court versus what can we implement? Okay, so if we need to implement this on the AODA, for example, that means replacing our entire fleet of subways. Okay, so we have to go to Bombardier now. What does that mean to go to Bombardier, and how much will that cost taxpayers or whomever? And looking at all that. So it's very challenging. There's a lot of different people in the mix, a lot of stakeholders. And so just as other people on this panel have mentioned, using your advocacy skills to ensure that you're getting, your point across, and making sure that the risk is being minimized, and the intent of certain legislation or certain decisions is being followed. Because a lot of people don't understand why we're doing a certain thing that we're doing, or why we're, making them do a certain thing we're making them doing. And having that JD allows you to talk to, your external counsel, understand the law, understand where they're coming from, and then also talk to your in-house team of non-lawyers and, explain all that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. Akua, leveraging that a little bit of what Jessica mentioned, some of the challenges, I'm wondering, could you tell us what some of the challenges are that you might face in your JD Advantage role? You're not necessarily practicing per se, but what are some of the challenges that you face along the way in trying to continue to move your career forward, but also at the same time, dispense and do the work that you do each day?
It's difficult for me to identify the challenges, because in a lot of ways, there are so many advantages to it. In my role, a large portion of my role is developing strategies to, advance equity, diversity, inclusion, as I've mentioned. And in doing that, I'm pulling from, obviously my understanding of equity, but also my understanding of fairness, which is informed by my understanding of justice, which obviously I've gotten from, from my experiences in law school and understanding the law more clearly. I'd say maybe some of the challenges are, there's always challenges in advocacy in terms of, bringing people along on the journey with you when you're trying to implement some of these strategies. But I think that really is strengthened by the skills that I've gained through law school, whether it's, being able to, negotiate things, through particularly the ADR skills that I learned in law school, whether it's mediating, negotiating, all of those things are very useful for my work in trying to implement these strategies. So I'd say that, the challenges are minimal. Right now, really, it's only been an asset for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's great to hear. And Jonathan, leveraging a bit of what Akua just mentioned as well, you touched on this briefly in your introduction. You are helping to negotiate, helping to manage things. Being as part of the bank, and as Jessica mentioned a moment ago, she's not on the legal team. I gather you're not also part of the in-house team at the bank, but you're leveraging these skills in order to be able to help others. Are there challenges, though, that you have to navigate, or is it just advantages, as Akua mentioned?
I wish it was just advantages. There's certainly challenges. I think, so one of the things that you need to be alive to if you're considering a JD Advantage role, or if that's where you want your career to go, is that in some ways you don't wear your legal hat as much. So I think a disadvantage that I realized once I got into the role was that I wasn't practicing anymore. And so even though I could provide that legal perspective in a roundtable where I'd be working with our in-house counsel, of which I'm not a member of that team, there was a couple of times early on where I would be reminded, John, we respect that you were a lawyer, but you're not practicing now. So we can't take what you're saying as legal advice or even as a legal opinion. What we can do, though, is give it a lot of weight because we know you've got experience. So that was a bit of a disadvantage because I felt like I had to forfeit something a little bit by taking the role. But the advantages, I think, far outweigh any sense of loss that I'd feel with not being a practicing lawyer anymore. Because right now I can draw from so many different areas, whether it be from the law, from policy, from my experience with government, and really influence and impact how it is that an entire institution looks at Indigenous people as clients and as partners. So some of the advantages, for sure, that I have a lot of autonomy and creative license when it comes to creating policy and strategy for the bank. So that's something I didn't really have when I was a lawyer. It was much more point and shoot in the sense of, here's a legal assignment, we need you to get it done. Here's something we need you to draft. Here's something we need you to submit. With the bank, it's a bit more fluid and a bit more open. I just have to work within the parameters. Also, it gives me the opportunity to create innovative first to market products. And this is something I never really got to do as a lawyer. You can't really stretch your creative muscles too much beyond applying it to the law or seeing how the law applies, which is still can be very, very fulfilling and very creative and very innovative. But to take what I've learned as a lawyer, my experience as a lawyer, and put it into an entirely different industry and see how it operates. It's kind of fun because you don't know the outcome. And beyond that, I'm learning something as I do it. So I consider that an advantage as well. So certainly challenges, but the advantages far outweigh that in terms of what I get to do on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. On that note, though, I'm wondering too, if you could touch on this before I turn it over to Conrad. Practice can also be, and we've all heard and we've experienced it, it can be pretty intense. The hours can be quite long. Are there other advantages beyond just having the skills that you are realizing in your role as a JD Advantage position at Scotiabank? Is it easier? Is it more manageable? Are there different types of opportunities? What's the life like? What's the life like to practice?
Sure. And Andre, I think this is a great question because I don't like the term work-life balance, but I know we all try to achieve something close to it, and law doesn't really always lend itself to that. So the role I have at Scotiabank, heading up our Indigenous Financial Services unit, affords me a little bit more time in terms of flexibility in my day. I mean, the pandemic has changed that for everybody, but working government hours as a government lawyer were pretty standard unless I was traveling for work, which is good and bad. I mean, it allowed me to pursue other interests outside of work a little bit more readily. But the great thing about this role is that even though the hours are a bit more fluid, and if I need to take my dog for a walk in the middle of the day, I can do so. There's also some aspects of it where when the work is there, you have to get it done. And I work across all of our time zones, so sometimes my days run a little bit late, but it's more out of a sense of passion and commitment than it is out of a sense of I have to do this or else it won't get done. So I would say most JD Advantage roles that I'm familiar with, or at least that I've considered myself, afford me greater flexibility in how I manage my day. But I would say a typical day for me doesn't really exist. I look a lot at client development, maintaining client base, and then a lot of what we call social capital. So working with our external partners to make sure that we're thought leaders, making sure that we're culturally competent and dealing with our clients in a culturally sensitive manner. So the reason why that's a good thing and that it's a little different than practicing law is if I get a little worn out on just focusing on clients, I can take a break and focus on another line of work. Or I can take a step out of the bank and talk to some of our partners as opposed to some of our clients. So I would say flexibility of my schedule is something I've certainly been afforded much more working at Scotiabank than working in law. So I would say just consider that too if you are looking to have a JD opportunity, that you can really make it your own in terms of how you manage your day and manage your time.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And Conrad, the reason I set this up this way is Jonathan just gave us a picture of what his life is like as an entrepreneur and as someone coming from a securities practice where life was pretty intense at a large organization. Has it really changed it as an entrepreneur in building a legal tech business, or are you still putting in those types of hours to be able to find success? So not everything is always equal, if you will. Conrad.
Yeah, that's a good question, Andre. Yeah, I think for me, I may have I certainly worked long hours back at the law firm, and that's sometimes true here as well. But it's a different type of work. Compared to my law practice as an M&A and securities lawyer, the work was basically client matter centric. So we had a deal come in or a transaction, and we had to work to get that done by the deadline, and that deadline was often prescribed either in legislation or sort of negotiated upfront with the clients and the other side. And so everything was driven to focused around sort of that client matter and getting the deal done by the deadline. And so that means that's a certain type of work where it's if the deadline is Monday, you're responsible to get everything done by Monday, which means you got to put in the hours that are necessary to do that. At Diligent and in legal tech generally, it's a much more the vibe is much more of a typical technology company. So we're focused on building products that our clients' lawyers want to use. So that's a different. We're focused on that mission. And so that means that the work is different. It's much more creative. We don't have the concept of a billable hour, so I'm not tracking my time every 6 minutes and writing down what I did, which is, I enjoy that. Certainly the hours can be long, but it's often it's what you make of it. So there are certainly roles within legal tech that are that don't require sort of that kind of time commitment, or aren't they're not sort of focused around deadlines. That kind of law practice often causes where that it's the deadlines that kind of cause that imbalance in work life. So you don't tend to have that structure in place in a technology company. So that's the advantage, I'd say, for sure. And in terms of disadvantages, one thing that at a law firm that you often get, especially as a junior lawyer, is very good training programs. So law firms often will have very good training programs for their junior lawyers. You learn from senior lawyers. You have a very structured formal program, whether it's as a summer student, an articling student, or then as a junior associate, and you gain a lot of benefit from that. Within a technology company, especially smaller companies, what you'll find is you're more responsible for your own education, and the company kind of supports you in getting your own education and figuring out the skills you need, which are often not related to law, because you'll come well equipped on the legal side with your JD, but then you kind of need to learn ancillary skills that are relevant, but they're outside of law itself.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Conrad. On that point of training and doing the work that you do, I'm wondering, Jessica, in your case, was your JD enough, or did you have to get additional training and acquire additional skills and credentials, if you will, to be in your role and to be taken as someone who is, if you will, licensed to do what you do?
So a large portion of my work these days is investigations, or reviewing other colleagues' investigations, or perhaps external counsel's investigations. So the JD was extremely beneficial for that, because you understand different standards. So for example, fair or like correctness, or balance probabilities, all of that is essential when understanding investigations and conducting investigations. However, I did take additional courses in order to better prepare me for my role. They were, not degrees, they're more certificate programs, but courses in investigations, in dispute resolution. I've taken quite a few courses in that the TTC has very generously provided me. So I've been very fortunate in that aspect. And also in my own time, I have been taking courses in equity and diversity, because that's just such a crucial and essential part of my day-to-day work. And while Ottawa was fantastic for that, I don't think you can ever really stop that knowledge and learning, especially it's changing very rapidly, and it's important to keep up with that aspect of my job. So JD was great, provided a fantastic foundation, but really the more specialized you go, the more you have to take courses to ensure that you understand each aspect of your role, and you can provide it with effectiveness.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. And Nakua, the same question for you as well. Did you have to expand your knowledge and learning in order to be able to do what you do?
So for my role, it wasn't required, but I thought it was important to develop additional skills to be able to do my work more effectively. So since I've left law school and become licensed, I've taken a data analytics course so I can better understand the collection of demographic data and self-identification data. Because sometimes in my roles, we would talk about, when you're talking about diversity, who's in the workplace. And, I'd be having conversations about how to slice and dice the data, and my eyes would just glaze over because I was like, what are you talking about? Right? And so I thought, it would be helpful to take a course in data analytics to understand that and have those conversations more clearly. And then in addition to that, I've taken a leadership and inclusion certificate, which has given me a better sense of best practices in equity, diversity, and inclusion in a range of workplaces, which helps me when I'm developing strategies for workplaces. And then next month, I'll be starting a change management certification so I can better understand the people side of change and how to bring people along on the journey when I'm trying to create more inclusive workplaces. So I think, like Jessica, I think you could never stop learning. And so, once I finish one thing, I sign up for the next course because I just feel like there's constantly things to learn and things are constantly changing in equity, diversity, and inclusion. So yes, definitely, I have taken additional courses.
Thank you so much, Kua. So a comment there being that the learning still continues and you have to continue to add to your skill set as you get into your roles. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I know that our audience is thinking about, well, here I am in law school, whether I'm in first year, second year, or third year, I kind of know what that journey is because I just go from year to year. And I think, I'm going to get called to the bar. I'm going to go off and work with either whoever I summered with or find my appropriate opportunity for my articling or licensing process. But I think folks are probably wondering, did all of you think about, well, I've got my law degree and I definitely want to do something else? Or was it just something that evolved over time where you decided that I wanted to do something else, and I can leverage these skills? So what I'm trying to get at is, how did you identify and when did you identify that you wanted to make that switch, if you will, or make that drive toward the JD Advantage? And I'll begin with Jonathan for a moment here, and then we'll go over to Jessica, Conrad, and Akua.
Yeah, this is a great question, Andre. And let me be absolutely clear. I never, ever in a million years thought I'd be working at a bank. Like, I mean that with all sincerity. I couldn't envision it. If you told me as a student, even when I was in practice for many years, I wouldn't have seen the path. I thought I was a government lawyer going to be a government lawyer my entire career. So this is a cautionary tale. Just anybody out there, this can happen to you too. Because when I was a student, people say, oh, you can use your degree in so many different ways. And I didn't really pay much attention to that. I knew what I wanted to do to some degree, and I was worked and focused on that. So it's very good to have goals while you're a student, have goals while you're in practice if you choose to practice early on, but just be open to the opportunities that are out there. Because really what happened here with me was that I was very much focused on my Aboriginal law practice. And I started to work on a couple of files that had to do with ministerial loan guarantees, where there has been a default. So Indigenous Services Canada was out of a lot of money. And I was starting to recognize a bigger problem, which was I was looking at from the legal lens, which was kind of at the tail end of the life cycle of this issue, where at the very beginning was an access to capital matter. The communities that were defaulting because this was the only way that they could get credit, or the only way that they could finance some projects that they are looking to put on in their communities. So what happened there, I can't really explain, because this job came up at Scotiabank. Someone drew my attention to it. And I can say this, it was less an interview and more of an exchange of ideas, where I had no financial experience whatsoever. And there I was interviewing for a very senior role within the bank. And this is something that I think is a good suggestion to all of you. If you are even willing or open to the idea of taking a JD Advantage role, find the organizations that will hire for attitude and train for skill. Scotiabank knew I didn't have any background working for a financial institution. They didn't care so much. They wanted a lawyer in this role because they knew a lawyer would understand the constraints that the clients were facing. So that's where it came together. If you had told me that as a law student, I never would have made that connection. But here I am, very proud to be working for Scotiabank. I love my job. I love what I do. But I did not think that my career path would take this trajectory. So just keep that open mind and look for those organizations that hire for attitude, train for skill.
Wonderful. That's a great bit of advice, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Jessica, in your case.
So similar to Jonathan, If you had asked me in law school, I would have, never expected this path for me. I received a job through very traditional OCIs. I summered, I articled, and it wasn't until I became an associate at that firm that I kind of looked around and went, I don't know if this is exactly what I had envisioned for myself or my career. And that's when I started to explore other opportunities. My spouse is actually also in the he's also a lawyer in non-practicing JD role, and he took a very different path. So he went and clerked, and then worked at a very small boutique firm, and then from there now works at a tech climate startup. And so very different path than I took. And so I guess my biggest advice for you is, don't feel like you need to have it all figured out. Life works in mysterious ways. You're going to move through different courses, and life changes day to day. It's always like we bought a house, I guess now a little while ago. And people always are like, oh, is this your forever house? And it's like, that concept doesn't necessarily exist. How do you know where you're going to be in 5 years, or what city you're going to live in? We were all chatting before this started about, even just technology and where you can work and where you can live. So just, if you see a job and it looks interesting, and you think that you would gain something by working there, then go for it. And just don't feel like you need to be like, okay, this is my end goal job and this is how I'm going to get there. And if that's you, that's great too. But just know that you don't have to have it all figured out. I don't think any of us would say in law school we did have it all figured out. I don't have it all figured out now. Let me be very clear about that. So just, let things flow as they will, and take opportunities as they do, because you don't know where they're going to lead. And we're all here too. So, and none of us probably would have guessed that we would have been here.
Jessica, that's absolutely correct, and great advice there too. If you had asked me would I be in a non-practicing role when I had my role on Wall Street, I would have told you never under the sun. I would still be there, kind of idea. So you never know where things will take you, including where you might live as well, because you never know with the tech what you can do. Conrad, over to you on that front, because I know you're now in a bit north of Toronto, working remotely. Was this the path always, or did it just happen along the way?
Yeah, I think like Jessica, I did not plan on being here. And I think, what Jessica touched on about being open to career changes and sort of, exploring different possibilities when they come up, I think that's absolutely correct. So for me personally, I went through the Bay Street hiring process. So I did, interviews, OCIs, worked as a summer student at a Bay Street firm, articled, was hired back as an associate, worked there for a couple years, and then the firm closed down in 2013, 2014. My practice group went to another firm, and so I practiced there for a couple years. And I was very happy throughout that whole time as a junior corporate lawyer. I enjoyed the work and enjoyed the life of a corporate lawyer. Of course, it was a bit stressful at times, but had a great time. But what I was doing, I had a commute of 1 hour on the subway every day, so 1 hour in and 1 hour back. And it was a time where I couldn't check my emails. I really couldn't do anything for that 1 hour. And so I started taking courses on just on a variety of topics that interested me. And I went down this rabbit hole of taking computer science courses, which for me was a bit different because I didn't have a computer science background. I did undergrad. I have a humanities degree in undergrad. And so, but I got really fascinated by that, and I got fascinated by machine learning. And I took the machine learning course from U of T, and I just listened to it on the subway each day. And so it opened my mind to the possibility of that kind of technology being applied to the practice of law. And that sparked sort of the initial interest. And from there, I started talking to people at my firm about it, tried to initially build this as an initiative within the firm that the firm would pursue, and didn't really plan on kind of co-founding a company or anything like that, and kind of only got there after I realized, okay, that's probably the only option for me in terms of how to pursue my passion in this regard. So yeah, I kind of this kind of came about just by me kind of learning new things and realizing, okay, how can I apply this to what I already know, and realizing that, okay, it seems like there's a good opportunity there to apply, you know, the growing field of machine learning and artificial intelligence to the legal field. So yeah, so that it kind of evolved, and I think, you know, they say, like, nowadays they say that, you know, people going into the workforce now will often have a few careers. You know, it tends to be rare now that you will, you know, you start at one place and you'll work there until you're 65. And yeah, I think it's the case that you should be prepared for having multiple careers actually throughout your working life. And yeah, for me, it's definitely it's been a career change for sure, but one that, you know, I've still been able to leverage my prior experience, you know, day to day, and still interact with lawyers and practice vicariously, I guess, through them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Conrad. And on that note of passion and interest, Takua, was CFAR on your radar and becoming a strategist your passion, or how did that happen for you?
No, I mean, if you had asked me if I was going to be in this role when I was in law school, I would have laughed probably and said, you know, there's no way. You know, I went to law school, and prior to law school, I was studying sociology and equity studies, and I was taking courses in, you know, Black feminism, anti-colonialism, you know, anti-racism. And I thought I would go to law school to, you know, put tools in my toolbox to do anti-oppression work, and I would be doing grassroots work. And, you know, so I knew that I wasn't going to be pursuing traditional legal practice, but in no way did I think I would end up in an institution like CFAR or at the Bay or at the Law Society. You know, I didn't participate in OCIs. I thought, you know, nope, that's not for me. I'm not going to be doing that. I did decide to article, and I articled union side labor. And I think all along the way, the choices that I made were really about pausing and thinking about my values, right? And my top values being, you know, like family, community, justice, equity, and finding roles that really aligned with those values. And so I stopped thinking about it as, okay, well, I have to do grassroots activism work, but it was more about, how can I further those values? How can I align with those values in various institutions? And so it doesn't necessarily matter where I am as long as I'm doing that work. And so I went to Law Society thinking, when I got there, I thought, okay, this is great. I will be here forever, right? You know, for as long as possible. And then, you know, the opportunity came up at Hudson's Bay, and I applied thinking, there's no way I'm going to get this job. And that's the other piece of advice I would give is, if you see something, you know, and you don't see that, you know, you don't feel like you match all of the qualifications in a posting, still apply. You know, because there's, you know, your law degree, first of all, is an advantage, right? It is an advantage. And you don't need to have all of the qualifications to do the work. You'll learn, you know, some of these things on the job, and the skills that you've gained through your you know, time at law school will really benefit you in the work that you're doing. And so, you know, I moved down to the Hudson's Bay and also thought, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. This is great. And then CFAR, you know, the opportunity came up there, and it really, it in some ways combines my, you know, my academic background in equity, diversity, and inclusion, you know, my passion for research, with the strategy piece, right? So I get to work with Nobel Prize winners who are, doing work on quantum physics, right? Things I completely do not understand, but it feeds my need and my desire to learn about, some of these complex issues. But at the same time, I get to infuse, the skills I learned from law school and equity, diversity, and inclusion into the work. So I wouldn't have seen myself on this path.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kua. And on that note of having that passion and having that interest, and also being open to the options and not turning away from the possibilities that are there, because if you don't apply, you've eliminated yourself, right? By applying, you're opening the possibility and the options. So I want to start with Jonathan on this for a moment, but I want to remind our audience that you can send in your questions, right? Remember, message me directly. I'll be happy to post them to our panelists. And if we can't get to them all, we will make sure that you ask those questions or encourage you to bring them with you to the networking session later today. So Jonathan, on that idea of, you had created your role in a sense, you said you through a conversation. There is no traditional hiring path for many of the things each of you have described. You can apply to some roles, you can have conversations, you can network. How would you encourage our audience to be able to develop that skill set and open up those possibilities for themselves?
Yeah, thanks, Andre. This is a tough question to answer, but I think the best way to do it is, or this is what I did, and I think there is some success to it. There's also some failures too, but I knew when I was in law school, I really wanted to work with and serve Indigenous communities. So something that I did when I was a law student was I looked at who was really shaping, who was leading in terms of cutting edge ideas that were going to benefit future generations. So who are the people either working with the Indigenous communities or in Indigenous communities that were making a difference? And then once I'd identified those people, and I didn't do this it wasn't like every week. I mean, maybe once a semester I would do something like this. I would reach out to them. And I just write some essentially fan mail and say, hey, I really like what you're doing. I'm a law student. I can only hope to have a career like you've had because I've watched you do this, this, and this. If you ever need somebody who's a student to provide a student's perspective or to assist you with something, I'd be happy to do that. And it's shocking, people can't really ignore whether it's an email or some type of message. They can't really ignore that. They were all students too, just like everybody on this panel was a student. We don't soon forget that experience. So my suggestion to you is that there is no traditional path towards a JD Advantage role, but if you know what you want to do or have a sense of where you want to work, whether it be industry based or whether it be with a specific group of people, whatever it is, just find out who's shaping that industry and reach out. And just as a brief aside, when I was a law student, I reached out to somebody who's a fantastic human being. His name's Clint Davis. He's still shaping the Indigenous community today, but he had the exact same role that I have now, although he was with the Bank of Montreal, not Scotiabank, when I was a law student. And when I reached out to him, he said, hey, why don't you come in? I'd love to sit down with you. That was 15 years ago. I mean, we're still in touch. We work together now on different things, but I modeled my education career after his. And so, I mean, it wasn't really a mentor-mentee relationship, but I saw somebody in the industry that I wanted to be in doing what I wanted to do. And it set out this path for me that I could follow or not follow. And it was just this nice little guiding light that I had throughout a lot of my education career and into my legal career. So I would suggest find the people who are shaping the industry and reach out to them.
Beautiful. Fantastic advice, Jonathan. That is great. Jessica, similar question to you as well. How can these folks take advantage of where they are now to start building that network and that opportunity, those options around themselves, and be open-minded as they move forward?
So I had a little bit of a different experience where, like many government jobs, it's actually, it says in my job description, JD, an asset. So it very clearly laid that out. And for me, I was at a large law firm, and so for me, it was a little bit different. It wasn't this grand plan, I guess you could say. I was having a hard time with my mental health at the time, and I knew I needed to make a change. So for me, moving to the TTC, and I moved to a consultant role. I didn't move to a manager role. I've moved up since being at the TTC. But for me, I moved knowing I needed to make a change, and to be blunt, at the time, my mental health was really suffering, and it didn't really matter where that change was. I kind of just needed a change to happen soon. So mine was a little bit different. I saw a job description and I went, you know what? This looks great. This looks like it's what I'm going to go for. I had never really explored too much of that area before, but I knew it was somewhat in my wheelhouse because I was practicing labor and employment law, although I was more on the labor and employment M&A side rather than the litigation side. And it was the best move for me. I think you will learn a lot about yourself as you're going through your career. We chatted a little bit earlier about hours and, work-life balance, if you want to call it that. And I've learned through myself that I'm someone who can work a lot of hours, but I like predictability. And that's what my job provides me. And that's something I never would have guessed about myself or really even knew that that was going to be a factor. I like knowing that when I kind of clock in and when I clock out. And I know that I can't take my dog for a walk during the day because I have to be there for those hours, but I'm okay with that because I know that I get to leave at a certain time. And so, kind of just back to what I was saying earlier is just, reach out to your network, but also just look at opportunities as they come and take advantage of each opportunity because you just don't know where it's going to lead you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. On that note, I think we have something in common there. It's not necessarily a lateral move from practice into your JD Advantage role. You said you began as a consultant and worked your way up within TTC to where you are today. When I left Wall Street and came back to Toronto, wanting to be in the professional development sphere, I started as a recruitment manager at Robert Half. So I didn't go from there to there. I actually went here and then started to climb and build my skill set as I started to move up in the work that I was doing. And that's important to remember. And I'm wondering, Akua and then over to Conrad, if you have advice on that front, because folks might think, I've always gone from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, progression from first year associate to second year associate to this, that there's always an upward trajectory, or do you need to be ready for that restart? Akua first.
I think you're right. You do have to be ready for that restart. I mean, I started in this area as a conflict resolution advisor, which was a very junior role. And I think in all of you don't have that baked in kind of career progression, right? So I've kind of had to jump from, employer to employer to progress within my role. So, and often in most, spaces, there aren't a junior equity, diversity, inclusion person, then a senior one. There's one usually in a lot of institutions and at various levels. And so, started in the junior role, then moved to a more senior role, and then jumped from organization to organization. And I think that sometimes you have to be a little bit more creative about how you think about, progression. It's not necessarily linear, right? So I think absolutely there's that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Conrad, over to you.
Yeah, I think that there is something to that strategy. If you've practiced and gone through this sort of this ladder up the associate or law firm hierarchy, you won't see that from my experience in a technology company. Things tend to be a lot more. The hierarchy is very flat. And often it's what you make of the role. So it will depend on, often when you come in for a position, you're not necessarily very skilled in what the company is doing. But then as you develop expertise in your domain, you take on more responsibility, and your role changes, where you're given more, let's say, oversight over the product, or more more interactions with, like, you're the one leading meetings with the client. So the role naturally evolves. So that's something that you should anticipate. So even if the role seems like it's a very junior role, you shouldn't think that, oh, it's going to be 5 years before I'm given any responsibility. It's going to sort of be up to you to take that. And there are plenty of opportunities where you can move your career in the direction that you want. And often these types of roles, especially in tech, they're very fluid. So you can do that very quickly. You're not sort of bound by the hierarchy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Conrad. Now, I know I'm going to be a minute over here, or two potentially, but I think overall, the advice that we've learned today from all of you is that being open to the possibilities, following that passion, recognizing there's no linear trajectory to what you're involved with is going to be critical. And also not necessarily comparing yourself with each other, but following what you are interested in doing and looking for those mentors, as some of you have mentioned as well, that are out there to help guide you along the way. Maybe Jonathan's trick around the flattery in those notes to get folks to respond to you could be helpful. As you're reaching out and building your network among the folks in our community, think about each other as well. It's important to be mindful that the folks that are in your school with you, your peers, your classmates, those from even undergrad as well, might be in touch with opportunities that you're not aware of. So sharing things with each other is going to be critical in helping to make sure that you're taking full advantage of everything that comes your way. And if something comes your way that you're not interested in, share it with others as well, because it might come back in other ways towards you with positive benefits as you move forward. I want to thank all of you so much for taking the time today to share your experiences. Students, I apologize that I didn't get to all of your questions either. I see a couple that are still left here. I was trying to work them into the questions I was asking. I encourage you this evening, if you are attending the session, to bring those questions with you so that you can ask the folks who are participating in the networking portion of this series. Thank you once again. And I would like to extend my thanks to all of the law schools who participated in creating this cross-country panel to allow us to be able to share with you these experiences. A copy of the recording will be provided to each of your schools so that you can leverage it and share with your colleagues as well. Once again, have a great afternoon and a great rest of the week and weekend. Thank you so much for sharing. Take care. Bye-bye.